Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down Godfather Part 3.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
It's one of those, isn't it? Like, whenever you talk about the movie, I think you're obviously going to get a lot of mixed feelings. Now, out of the entire trilogy, this was the one I was most curious to go back to because it hasn't really got a good reputation. Even though it was nominated for Best Picture, everyone agrees that this one was the worst. Whether it's Sofia Coppola's performance, pay disputes behind the scenes, or just the general almost TV feel to it, everything was lambasted at the time. Now, whenever I've gone back to it, I've always thought it's not so bad. Unfortunately though, this is a sequel to two of the greatest films ever made, so no matter what, it was always gonna come up short. Now, Coppola stated that he wanted to make an epilogue which would tell the aftermath of Michael's story. Those two films though, well done, handled it perfectly, and thus many felt this was an unnecessary sequel. However, since its release, I do think that the movie's gained a fan base. Coppola also recently re-edited the film, and that's a major aspect of what I want to talk about. Now, there's actually 3 versions of the film, all clocking in at almost 3 hours. So yay! I had to watch 9 hours of a movie that I didn't really enjoy that much. Thank you, Francis. The thumbs up's right there. The final version is titled The Godfather Part 3 CODA, The Death of Michael Corleone, and I think it's probably the best version of the film. In this video though, we're going to be going through them all and talking about all the differences. We'll also be discussing the nightmare it was behind the scenes and all the hidden details that I think you might have missed. We're going to be getting into it all in just a bit, but first just a quick word from our sponsors. Now, this video is sponsored by Factor. Factor takes the guesswork out of grocery shopping and meal prep, saving you time and energy for other things. Raising my kids and spending most of my theory time making videos for you guys means I haven't really got the time to spend hours and hours a week cooking. Factor's no hassle prepared foods make sure you have something nutritious on hand when you don't have time to think about making a meal. Factor meals arrive pre-prepared and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. It's perfect for busy lifestyles, and with 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons a week to choose from, you'll always have new flavors to explore. Now, in the past, when it comes to meal prep, I've worked with HelloFresh, but in case you don't know, they now own Factor. This means there's an even wider array of meal plans to choose from, and you can enjoy both brands with a discount direct from me. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code SPOILERS50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. On top of that, you'll also get 20% off the next month of orders. Factor is clean eating made easy and uses discount to eat delicious food fast with the code SPOILERS50. That code again, SPOILERS50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Huge thank you again to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the rest of the breakdown. Now, depending on what version of the movie you watch, you're going to get a different beginning. As I said, there's 3 versions of the film, and the one you've probably seen is most likely the second cut.
Why?
Well, you see, kids, the film was released in 1990, and in 1991 it got a VHS release. This was advertised as the final director's cut, and it had 9 minutes added to the movie. This was all people could get their hands on until 30 years later when the theatrical cut was released on the 4K Blu-ray. That's in the same package as CODA, but you can kind of tell Coppola doesn't want you to watch it. It's buried deep in the special features, and you have to select it from there.
Always love you.
Love somebody else.
I felt like Fredo getting taken out in the boat because there was no way I was getting out of CODA. Now, speaking of Fredo, his legacy looms large over the first 2 cuts, with us beginning out in Nevada. In the beginning, we cut to the old home from part 2 and catch the entire place in ruins. The docks and boats are busted up, Anthony's toys line the inside, and the entire place, it acts as a metaphor. This was of course Michael's family home, and it shows how those relationships have been left in ruins. This is coupled in the next shot as well, which takes us over to
New York City.
Our establishing shot shows the Twin Towers, but this is something that was removed from CODA. Obviously, you guys can figure out why they may not have wanted to include that, and from here we then cut to Michael's home. Here we come across an old family photo and can see a time when the group was still together. From here we pan over to another one and see that it's just Mary and Anthony. Kay is gone and Michael is missing, so it kinda sets the stage for how things are. This shot is super effective, and they included it in CODA right after the opening. Unfortunately though, the old house was completely cut, but I have to say, I actually like its inclusion. From here we then went to Anthony's induction, which sets up his relationship with the Vatican. Instantly we know exactly what path his life took, and it continues things from the end of part 2. There we left Michael on his own, looking back at life and everything he'd lost. This then came full circle in part 3, when at the end we saw Michael die on his own. In it there are echoes of Vito's death, but unlike Vito, he doesn't leave his legacy. And that's where we get the biggest change of CODA, in which we cut away just before Michael dies. We leave him here sat on his own, reflecting the end of where things were with part 2. Then Coppola puts a quote on screen talking about the phrase Cent'anni. It says that when Sicilians wish you it, it means for long life, and in the end, a Sicilian never forgets. So Michael is living a long life alone, tortured by the pain of losing his family. His actions of course caused his daughter's death, but he of course has all the souls on top of that who died in part 1 and 2. Now when I first saw it, I didn't really like this change, as I think having him die was a stronger way to go. However, when diving into it and seeing what it means, I think it probably works better and sums up everything he lost. We end with that rousing score and look back on a life of pain and sadness. In flashbacks, he dances with his daughter, Apollonia and Kay, and these are all women he lost due to the life he led. It's enough to make you cry, and yeah, that music especially, it always gets me. Real tears there, mate, real tears, and due to its closeness to the ending of part 2, many people have said that this ending is redundant. To be fair, it's pretty much just a copy of that, and we didn't really leave him any further character-wise. This is the quote-unquote death of Michael Corleone, which in itself ties back to part 2. That was the original title Puzo had for his script, with Coppola wanting to honour that original vision. It still kind of leaves things a bit open-ended though, and hey, maybe he met someone who brought him joy. I think having his death, it adds some finality, and lets us know in the end that the character had nothing. Still though, I think both work, and it's a sort of pick your poison. It's the Schrodinger's Corleone, where on the very same Blu-ray, he lives in a state of being both alive and dead. Anyway, that's the end of the video. We've covered everything I need to, and I'm off. Thanks for watching the video. Right, so obviously we've still got a lot to go over, yeah, but CODA, it actually starts off pretty strong. Taking a scene that happened at 40 minutes in the original cut, we begin here with the head of the Vatican Bank. Playing it alongside the opening of the original, you can instantly see why this was shifted up. The banker says,
Don Corleone, I need your help.
With it clearly being based off The Undertaker. We have the shot set up the same and a slow zoom out from the character's face. We then pull out to see the Godfather's shoulder, and yeah, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. I do like that we open this way, and though I'm missing Nevada, it's a strong way to start. The Vatican are in a desperate situation with them having accumulated a gigantic deficit. It's now 20 years since we left Michael behind, and we join him here at the age of 59. Aged a lot, but we learn he's been donating to a lot of charitable causes. They say there's a correlation between guilt and generosity, with Michael trying to balance out his bad karma. Now I think with this movie, the character is really trying to do one of two things. He wants to get right with God and get right with the family, and finally make the Corleones legit. Offering $600 million, this will make him the biggest shareholder in Immobiliare. Now, this story had some truth to it as well, with nearly $800 million going missing from the bank. The guy behind it was known as Michele the Shock Sindona, who was an Italian banker and a convicted felon. At the time, the newly appointed Pope started to investigate it, and yeah, didn't go too well for him. Pope John Paul I was known as the Smiling Pope, and his reign just lasted 34 days. Now, his death is attributed to a heart attack, but there's lots of conspiracy theories. When he was anointed, he said his reign would be a short one, and lots of things were going on behind the scenes. The theories never died out, and there were suspicions that the mafia were involved. Now, why Coppola was interested in this was because Michele the Shock was a financer at Paramount. He put money towards making the first two Godfathers, which was a story that of course caught his attention. He thought suggesting there was mob involvement would be pretty controversial, but by 1990, nobody seemed to care. And what Michael is trying to do is basically sell all his casinos and outfits. He'll then get the shares, which will make the money liquid, and doing this, it'll get washed by the bank. The clean money will make the family legit, and Michael will be absolved of his sins. As he says, Michael and his family will be freed from their past, and it's the first time he might actually go legit. However, what this entire thing is about Coppola trying to show that everything's corrupt. It doesn't matter if it's the business or the church, there's people in everything who are just out for themselves. Now, you might also notice that there's George Hamilton beside him, who's playing the part of BJ Harrison. This This was originally going to be Tom Hagen's role, with them having to rewrite it so that he had a counsel. We are supposed to believe Hamilton's a very loyal friend, but we don't know his character at all.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
You don't really get the connection, and yet there's not really much that you can do with him. But here we have two desperate men kickstarting the movie, and the similarities, they don't stop there. Every Godfather film begins with a party, and it's the same thing here. In the theatrical cut, we get Michael's ceremony, whereas CODA just cuts straight to the party. The movie pretty much then just follows most of the theatrical at this point, but it's been excised of 13 minutes. I really don't think there was enough here to make a 3-hour movie, and I feel like Coppola felt the same way. However, he said the film was taken from him during editing, and they stretched it out to be as long as they could. At the party, we see Connie once more, who's played by Talia Shire. Talia apparently based the performance on Norma Desmond in the movie Sunset Boulevard. Singing this song Cuban Rhapsody, this was also sung by Yolanda at the party in part 2. Around it, we're also introduced to Don Altobello, who's basically a Hyman Roth figure. Behind him is also Shire's real-life mother Italia, with this pretty much being a family affair. Talia is of course Francis Ford Coppola's sister, and he's also related to Nicolas Cage. Cage was almost going to play the part of Vinny, who we meet next alongside his mother. As we learn, he's Sonny's illegitimate child, and we see he's getting into fights from the off. He's a hothead, mate. He's a hothead. Now, what I love is that we get the return of his mother, Lucy Mancini. Played by Jeannie Lanero, she reprises her role from part 1. This is who Sonny hooked up with at the wedding, and it was great seeing the actress return. Also, the surname's Mancini, but Andy Garcia pronounces it wrong.
Write it in Mancini, M-A-N-C-I-N-I.
So next time people are in the comments like, mate, you're pronouncing the names wrong, this video's disrespectful, it's terrible. I want you to remember, remember that even the actors, they were pronouncing stuff wrong in the movie. I won't forget, mate. I'll be like Michael Corleone, remembering the battering I got in part 1 for mispronouncing Apollonia. Appreciate the feedback though. Now, who initially wanted the part was Robert De Niro, who of course played Vito during part 2. They even considered explaining he looked just like his grandfather, but I think rightly so that they steered away from doing it. Anyway, as we cut around the party, we see Mary, who is played infamously by Sofia Coppola, often regarded as one of the worst performances of all time. I think it's okay, mate. Wonder how she got that job. I think in most of the films, though, this would be passable, but it's the fact she's amongst so many Hollywood greats. And to be clear, she had acted before, like beyond playing the baby in the first film. The channel Be Kind Rewind, they did a big video a couple of months ago talking about the movie and every project that led to this. She actually had some really good performances, but I think, she was just out of her league. So what was it that made this entire thing go down? Well, in order to talk about that, I think we have to go back to the beginning and how the movie was made. Now, Coppola never wanted to make any of the Godfather sequels, not even 2. However, Paramount didn't want to kill that golden goose, and they kept attempting to make sequels with or without him. I listened to a lot of podcasts on films before putting these videos together, and now Playing went in depth into the making of it. Stuart there said he read through 12 different scripts, and I managed to uncover most of the main ones. These all had their own crazy directions, but most of them centered around Michael's son. The first major one had him joining the CIA and assassinating a dictator out in Costa Rica. That was scribed by Michael Eisner, who you might know as being a big wig at Disney. Next, they went back to Mario Puzo and had him write up a version of his own. That had Anthony inherit the empire, and he'd then follow in his father's footsteps. A third draft was made that combined the two, and that had him not only killing dictators while he worked for the CIA, but he'd also inherit the family. John Travolta was tapped to play him, but fortunately, it never got off the ground. And Puzo did go on to write a book called The Sicilian, and this followed Michael during his years out in Sicily. This got adapted into a movie of the same name, which starred none other than Christopher Lambert. However, when you watch it, you'll realise it has little to no connection to The Godfather. Every reference to it's removed, and it's basically like in Madame Web when they keep refusing to say Peter Parker. Now, Vincent Patrick then came out in 1982 and wrote what I'd class as being a legacy sequel. Legacy sequels are something we get a hell of a lot of today, and this was kind of going to be the first. Now, by that I mean they were going to do the usual where they kill off all the old characters and introduce new ones. Yay! Anthony Corleone's CIA action figures! This never got off the ground either, and the next iteration was called The Godfather, The Family Continues. This was to feature a gang war between the Irish Mafia and the Corleones, but again, it all kind of fizzled out. However, the writers Nick Marino and Thomas Lee Wright, they did apply to the WGA to get writing credits on the final film. That was rejected, but the ideas were starting to form, with us moving away from those CIA stories. Sylvester Stallone was also attached to not only play Anthony, but also to direct it. Either way, Coppola was fully out, but just when he thought he was out, they pulled him back in.
Why?
Well, Coppola, he's known for being independent and taking massive risks on making his movies. Most of them have been self-financed, and in a lot of cases, it tends to pay off. Apocalypse Now is a great example of this, and a breakdown of it on the channel right now. Megalopolis is a movie that, as of making this video, is still to be released, and there's been lots of things back and forth on its production behind the scenes. Now, when you have big hits, it's all good. However, if one of these projects fails, then you're in a bit of trouble. Unfortunately for him, he had two big flops with Cotton Club and From the Heart. Both were really expensive, and he declared bankruptcy in 1983. He'd also do it again in 1990, and he'd have to do it once more during 1992. So around the 80s, the guy was in a lot of financial trouble, and just when he thought he was out, they put you get the joke, mate. You get the joke with that one. So he went back to Puzo, and over a long hot summer, they hashed out a script together. It's important to bear in mind though that this never got finished, and it said that Coppola wasn't even on set to direct, and he was always in his trailer typing away on his typewriter. This trailer was known as the Silver Fish, which had a rig filled up with monitors. With an earpiece, he could direct from the trailer and focus constantly on rewriting that script. Apparently, he'd write and rewrite the same pages over and over, constantly changing lines for the movie. The studio had given him 13 months to finish the picture, and they needed it in time for the next year's Oscars. However, they were filming with an Italian crew that didn't speak English, and thus the direction, it kinda suffers for it. To make matters worse, they had several disasters, with Robert Duvall refusing to sign on. He and Coppola had made several movies together, with the pair being lifelong collaborators. So what happened? Well, Coppola said he viewed him as a brother, but I'm guessing that he meant he was Fredo. Duvall said to 60 Minutes, "If they paid Pacino twice what they paid me, that's fine, but not 3 or 4 times, which is what they did." Duvall apparently got the script and quickly realized that he was the co-lead. We know that Pacino got $8 million, so you can kind of work out what Duvall got offered. Unfortunately, Coppola had written the script around him, with it eventually being revealed that Tom was an informant. All those years of being scorned by Michael had made him turn on the man that he once called his brother. He was also going to be one of the key conspirators, but they ended up having the character removed. Coppola has stated the movie feels incomplete without him, but Duvall has said that he doesn't regret leaving. Sadly, this probably would have been his biggest part in the franchise, as he does get brushed to the side during part 1 and 2. Now on top of this, we also have Winona Ryder, who was cast as Mary. Other people in the running were Madonna and Julia Roberts, who almost got the part. In the end though, she went off to do Pretty Woman, which, let's be honest, it worked out best for her. There was also a really tragic side to it too, which happened in the case of actress Rebecca Schaeffer. Schaeffer was set to audition for the part, with her expecting to receive the script by courier. Getting a knock at the door, she answered it to find Robert John Bardo there. Bardo had stalked her for 3 years and even showed up to set with a knife. Schaeffer ended up talking him down, but then he returned and shot her an hour later. This led to California enacting a number of anti-stalking laws, and it's a very tragic element in this movie's production. Now when things got rolling and Winona arrived, she ended up fainting on the first day of filming. She then dropped out just 2 weeks later with nervous exhaustion, and Coppola was in a bit of a tight spot. So what did he do? Well, he turned to his daughter. Pacino was absolutely furious, and he said that the whole thing was gonna be a disaster. Unfortunately, Coppola was off in the trailer though, so these concerns, they fell on deaf ears. However, he did jokingly say to Sophia eventually, "When you get to urge the act, lie down and wait for it to pass." Hey, he was joking. Al was joking, apparently. Hounded in the press, they were accused of nepotism, but Coppola fired back at his critics. He said he'd always wrote the part with her in mind and had made the script from his own point of view. He was the father figure and she was the daughter, and for better or worse, things rolled ahead. I do feel a lot for Sophia because she was a teenager thrust into this massive film. She also had to kiss guys on screen while her dad was behind the camera, well, from his trailer anyway. On top of this, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino were not getting along, and the pair just had a very messy breakup. You can tell at points she doesn't even want to look at him, and there was originally a sex scene planned with them, but she said it was never going to happen. Massive tangent there, and at 6:35 we see as Zaza interrupts the party. Played by Joe Mantegna, you might recognize him from voicing Fat Tony in The Simpsons. Zaza himself was named after Coppola's grandmother, with him being an amalgamation of several figures. The first of these is mobster John Gotti. Convicted of 5 murders, Gotti took down the real-life Godfather that the original movie was based on. The other figures are Joe Colombo and Crazy Joe Gallo. Gallo organised a hit on Colombo due to him being a high-profile public figure that drew unwanted attention. On top of this, he made way more money than the other families, but he refused to share it. The idea of sharing profits is something that comes up later, with Corleone giving the family payments. Zaza is the one who doesn't get one though, with him clearly feeling burned by disrespect. Now why Michael did this is probably for one of 2 reasons. The first of these is because he heard Zaza was talking crap behind his back and didn't really feel like doing the guy a favour. The second is that he didn't want any finances connected to drugs, which is something that Zaza was involved in. The entire thing of course builds off the back of Vito, who refused to get into the drug game. This eventually led to a hit, which is something that also happens with Michael. We can also see Michael getting presented with an award by Pope Paulus. This is touching upon it being the year of 3 popes, with 3 being elected during 1978. We also meet Bridget Fonda's Grace, who's a character that survived earlier drafts. You would wonder why such a big name would play her, but in the end, the part had been whittled down. This was a role that was also offered to Madonna, but she wanted way too much money for what in the end is just a small part. Mary and Vincent end up meeting, and there is a weird incest storyline that happens throughout the movie, which I think a lot of people remember because it's bad. It is kissing cousins, which Coppola tried to downplay, and he actually talked about this quite in depth on the commentary. He said, he said that his great-great-great-grandmother used to be a seamstress, and she ended up scratching her nose with a needle. That got infected, and thus the nose had to go. Her family said she'd never find a man, and in the end, she married her cousin. Sounds mental, but Coppola said he pulled from his own history, and that's something that we've seen throughout the movies. Returning at this point is Johnny Fontaine, who of course appeared in that first film. Singing and dancing with Connie beside him, this he of course builds off the back of their scene at the wedding in the first movie. Now speaking of returning characters, we see Kay come back and she looks at an old photo of Anthony's communion. This pulled from the opening of part 2, and alongside it we have Connie from that scene. There's also Sonny and Vito on the bottom row, and initially I thought it was Tom, but in the wider shots it does look more like De Niro. Now in this shot we can see Connie's wedding, with this being where Michael introduced her to his family. It was a photo like the one in the top left where Michael brought Kay over, but we can see that he didn't hang up that picture. The pair then stand apart, and oop, is that Fredo just before he got on the boat? Bit rich that Michael, and I don't mean the cake. Shabow! Going back into the room, we learn Anthony's leaving school to go and become a singer, and it reeks of Johnny Fontaine going to Vito in the first film. I do wonder if Michael pulled some strings, as come the end he gets to perform in an opera, but we never get to see anything like the horsehead scene. Instead, this shows he doesn't want to be part of the business and would rather do something completely different. Anthony is played by Frank D'Ambrosio, who'd later be known for Phantom of the Opera on stage. Guy could really sing as well, with him winning the part after the creative team auditioned over 200 actors. Now him stepping away from the family, it's something that was going to originally be seen at the end of part 2. We were going to have him and an older Anthony arguing, with the latter stepping away from his father. We then cut to Michael sat on his own, with that being the only scene left in the film. This scene would also have Connie talking about how Fredo drowned, which is something that also appears in this movie.
You and your family from Enzo the Baker.
Is that bloody Enzo the baker?
Who are you? I am Enzo, the baker.
He's back, mate. He's back. He is back. This is like a No Way Home cameo, mate. 5 out of 5. No notes. Classic movie, best movie of all time. Now, dancing with his daughter, this of course sets up the shot at the end where the women in his life have all done something similar. To Centani, we see as he's wished a long life, and it's one that's going to be filled with pain and misery. Now we cut over to Vinny's, where hit's carried out while he's shacked up with Grace.
I love you, I love you.
I love you too.
Like, I swear they just met, because she even says,
You got a cat?
So like, she doesn't know him that well, and they're already saying, oh, look, never mind. Now we get a wide shot of the bedroom and can catch a photo of Sonny, showcasing how much the dad he's never met means to him as a person. He wants to live up to his legendary image, hence why he gets involved with Michael. Sending Grace out, she's grabbed by a goon and he carries out his first kill in the movie in front of a photo of his dad. Have to say, Garcia is really convincing as Sonny's son, and I do think he is solid in the movie. All the way back in 2010, Garcia revealed there had been plans for part 4. This would focus on Vinny being the Godfather who took the family into the modern era. On the flip side of this, we'd follow a young Sonny with Leonardo DiCaprio being picked as first choice. Obviously, it would parallel part 2 and play off Vito and Michael. Puzo and Coppola started working together, but unfortunately during it, the former passed away. Coppola said he wouldn't make one without him, so ultimately the project's been abandoned. Michael has some breakfast, and we see him getting some orange juice. So on our last two breakdowns, we've talked about how orange is often used to signify death. I'm not going to go over every example, because look, there's like 2 other videos on it. I know this was denied as being intentional in part 1. I felt that by part 2, they had been doing it on purpose. I kind of feel like that's the same here as well, with there being oranges in notable scenes. Just before Altobello orders Michael's hit, he throws a kid an orange. We also have an orange that rolls on the table just before the helicopter shows up. Altobello also drinks orange juice and Michael dies with an orange in his hand. Well, at least in the theatrical cut, but this again drops down and rolls onto the ground. Again, that scene has been retconned, but I do feel like the colours used throughout the movie for a reason. At this point, we get images of newspapers riffing off the montage of them from the first film. This was originally edited by George Lucas, as he wanted to quickly convey the passage of time. Speaking of time, the Financial Times, they have a headline to the right that plays off real life. This was the assassination of Aaron Eve, which was carried out by the IRA. That happened in 1979, mere months before the movie's set. Now from this point, the film gets kind of boring, with it really plodding along between 2 plots. On one side, you have Michael's finances and the time at the Vatican, and on the other side, you have the Jake Lloyd School of Acting.
Why are you doing this? Why am I doing this?
I'm a person and my name is Anakin.
Dad, I want this to bring me closer to you.
Coppola, I feel like he just didn't really know what to focus on, and he was constantly trying to give Michael more and more. The issue is that we'd already told his story, and hearing about finances, it isn't that interesting. All the scripts before had one key characteristic, and that's that they all focused on the new blood. Here though, you can't really do that because they don't really have that interesting of a plot. So what you're left with is 2 stories that drag their heels and don't really go anywhere. Now at 42 minutes, we cut to the China Bowl. Ooh, dramatic. According to IMDb Trivia though, this is actually the same spot that was Jack Dempsey's restaurant. This is the one where Michael was picked up in that very first film before he was taken away for the meeting at the restaurant. Altobello then tells him the other families are unhappy as he won't use Immobiliare to launder their money. Over at the Vatican, we hear a radio report in Italian, but the subtitles say the Pope's in ill health. Coming to a meeting, we then see several people in suits, which is clearly supposed to riff off meetings with the mob. It's Coppola subtly saying all institutions have corruption and perhaps conflating the fact that the mafia are also deeply religious. Even though there's the constant carrying out of sin, they still see themselves as being men of God. However, there's always someone above them, and we can see the church have their own dons. Cutting to another scene, we see the head sat down in a chair, which is clearly playing off Michael. To make things even more clear, he says,
"It's not personal. It's only business."
Now outside, Michael says,
We're back with Borgias.
and this is a nod to the real-life Pope Syndicate, which Puzo wrote about in the book called The Family. These were the inspiration for the Corleones, with each character being a member of the family. Vito was based off Pope Alexander, with the kids also being based off the younger ones. Cutting back to New York, we see Vinny showing Mary the Genco Olive Oil Company. This of course was in both the earlier films, with it being where Vito made his fortune. We then get a bloody great cameo from Catherine Scorsese. Mother of Martin, she also appeared in Goodfellas during the same year. Cutting to a helicopter flying over Vegas, this foreshadows the attack about to come, and it's at this point that he meets with the other heads. Corleone rattles off about how Zaz is on the cover of Time magazine, and that he's also Esquire's best dressed gangster. This is where we really linked it with Gallo due to him getting lots of unwanted publicity for the mafia. Heading out to calm him down, Altobello's out of the room for the helicopter attack. just takes it a bit too much over the top in it when you've got a guy holding onto his lucky coat, shouting about it before getting hit. It just becomes a bit of a farce. The subtlety that there used to be in the hits, that's gone, and we've basically turned it into Scarface, which I do like, but yeah, it just feels out of place in this trilogy. Now, cutting to my guy peeling an orange, we also see a big bowl of spaghetti in a pan. This calls back to the first movie when it was Clemenza who showed Michael how to cook for a group of people. After delivering the pull him back in line, we then see Michael collapsing. In these moments, he screams out Altabello before then shouting Fredo. Altabello! Both were close characters that betrayed him, and it's in this he figures it all out. Now this is revealed to be due to his diabetes, which is something that has him rushed off to the hospital. Obviously, it's sort of similar to what happened with Vito, with the midpoint of the movie focusing on the character's ill health. Throughout the rest of the movie, his eyesight starts to fail, which is why he wears his sunglasses more often. Coppola wanted to have Michael being similar to King Lear, who also ended up going blind. At an hour 3 minutes, we see an establishing shot of the hospital, and you can also see the Corleone name on it. During the montage of the newspapers in part 1, we also saw headlines saying a hospital had reached its funding goals. This was the one that Vito was looked after in, and it's likely being built off the back of that. Visited by Kay, the pair then begin to reconcile their relationship. She invites him to Sicily to see Anthony's opera, and he says that he's gonna be there for it. Now originally, this was gonna set things up for how the movie was gonna go. Michael and Kay were gonna become a couple again, and after the opera, we dissolved to a church. Here Michael would be gunned down, and then he'd die being held by Kay. This gunman ending was kept in the film, but they put it at the opera and had Mary die instead. Now when it was Winona, Mary was gonna live, but along the way, Coppola decided on something different. I think that the new ending with CODA, that really highlights what he was trying to go for. Now this is a bit of a sensitive subject, but I do think when we go into it, you will kind of get more of an idea of why it is Mary dies. In order to do this though, we have to look at Coppola's real life and the tragedy that struck him during 1986. Coppola was out making Gardens of Stone and his son Giancarlo went for a boat ride with his friend Griffin O'Neill. Passing in between two boats tied with a tow line, this ended up decapitating Giancarlo. Coppola was completely destroyed, with Griffin being charged with manslaughter. Giancarlo's fiancée was pregnant as well, with Francis seeing firsthand what his son's absence had led to. I think due to it also being his film set, you know, it's probably not a massive stretch to imagine he felt guilt at some point. You know, that isn't the case, but look, we've all got someone that we've lost and have had a feeling of guilt over it. I personally believe that Coppola knew firsthand that losing a child was a fate worse than death, and this is why he switched it to being Michael that lived. Losing Mary is the worst thing that could happen to him, and he spent the next 20 years alone and miserable. And that's obviously not spelled out, and I think it's something you can take either way. However, Pacino was very pissed because he'd obviously signed on thinking that Michael was going to die. Michael's funeral was even written and rehearsed, but in the end, they just didn't shoot it. I think it shows though that they didn't really have this movie locked in, and they were constantly going back and forth and changing their minds. These days, movie delays are pretty commonplace, and I think they should have just given Coppola more time. He could have hashed out the script and maybe convinced Duvall to come back, but yeah, the guy had a deadline. He also said on the commentary that they didn't have time to do a lot of takes with Sophia, and that's why we get stuff like,
I love you, cuz.
I love you too, cuz.
Cutting to a parade, we get a play off the one in part 2. There Vito used it as cover to kill Panucci, whereas here it's a hit on Zaza. Shot against the glass, this is similar to one of the kills on the Five Families during part 1. Cutting to Michael, he's furious they made the hit, and Connie's there too. In the theatrical, we did get a scene where she was revealed to be planning it, and for this movie, she really stepped up to the mark.
Now they'll fear you.
Maybe they should fear you.
In the past, she had been shoved out of the business, but here we see her becoming a real Corleone. It sort of shows how the life corrupts everything it touches, and in the end, she falls just as much as Michael. Cutting to Sicily, we see Don Tomasino, who's appeared in all 3 films. In part 1 he looked after Michael, and in part 2 he was in Sicily with Vito. He ended up getting shot, and this is what led to him struggling to walk. They really wanted to get Claudio Gapia back, but unfortunately he died before they started shooting. You also see Vinny here is playing with an orange, and Tomasino later dies. He's killed because he recognizes the assassins, though he doesn't know what they're up to. I think this stuff really excels, and there are good parts of the film. However, when you've got Anthony basically singing the Godfather theme tune, Just takes you out of it a bit, mate. Now, it turns out this was Michael and Apollonia's song, and we see him putting on his glasses. This, of course, then happens again at the end of the movie when we see him doing the same thing. It's clearly showing the heartbreak he's hiding, and it is a nice character touch, even though the song's weird.
I really love him.
He's your first cousin.
Then I love him first.
Dear me. Anyway, he tells his kids about how he lost Apollonia, and Callow really comes into these scenes.
She was wonderful, beautiful. I loved her. And then she died.
In the novel, he died with Apollonia in the car, but here he's alive and they can have him back as a bodyguard. Apollonia's legacy looms large over Sicily, and at an hour 27, we get photos from behind the scenes on that first film. Michael does what Vito did with Luca Brasi, and he tells Vinny to go and say he wants to work with Altobello. The conspiracy stuff I think works, and Vinny's drafted into the inner circle, saying he wants to run away with Mary, but Michael won't allow it. It actually allows the cousin thing to come together in a solid way. I think the relationship itself is just something that falls flat, and we're obviously, all kind of laughing about how badly it plays out because of the incest stuff and the acting. Here he's properly introduced to Lucchesi, who was based on Guido Andreotti. This ex-Italian prime minister was a controversial figure, with him being suspected in a number of different things. That included assassination attempts on rivals, and he was even put on trial for his association with the mob. Labelled the trial of the century by the Italian press, this saw his connections to them being blown wide open. Gilday was also based on Paul Marcinus, who has refused to open up about any of his dealings. Mixed in with that is Michael asking for orange juice and candy bars from the future Pope, which I think is all stuff that takes away from the main thrust of the plot. What it does, though, is it allows for some character moments with Michael confessing his sins. We see Michael doing it through the gap between the pillars, with the future John Paul on one side showcasing the divide between the two. It also creates the idea it's a confessional booth, and Michael really opens up about his mistakes throughout the trilogy. Al Pacino massively disagreed with this though, and he felt like Michael wouldn't regret anything. He said he knew it had to be done, and thus he wouldn't look back on it wishing otherwise. The next day, the Pope dies, and I was on this watch show, I was like, did the Mafia do that? They didn't, but it's a thing. Now next we meet the assassins Sparra and Mosca, who have been charged with taking out Michael. Kay comes in on a train, and this reflects the departure of the Corleones at the end of part 2. Michael also presents his son with a drawing from part 2, and the home of Sicily is where the family come back together. Kay and Michael tour Corleone, and we see the church that's appeared in all 3 films. This is where Michael went to in part 1 for Sanctuary, and it's where Vito fled from at the start of part 2. It's here that we also get a puppet play, which has a lot of symbolism. Puppet strings have been used throughout the franchise, with them even appearing on the logo. They show who's in control, with Michael holding them metaphorically. The play itself also has a father stabbing his daughter in the heart, with Mary being shot there at the end due to her father's actions. The puppet looks a lot like Sophia, with this foreshadowing the death at the end. Death seems to surround the character, and he takes him back to where he and Apollonia lived. He confesses his love to Kay and says he wants her back, and I think in this place of loss, he feels like he realizes everything she meant to him. She finally accepts his love and reciprocates it, but fate always gets in the way. Michael confesses that he didn't want to become his father, but in trying to avoid it, he always ends up on that path. This is a chance for him to move in a new direction, but Tomasino's death, it ends up changing things back. Obviously, he has to strike back, and Kay quickly realizes this. Framed standing in a doorway this time, she ends up leaving rather than the door being closed on her. It's shot almost exactly the same as that scene from the end of part 1, with conspiracies being discussed with Michael. This time though, she walks away, thus showing that she's made the choice. It's really well put together, and from here we go into the anointment of the new Pope. At this point we get newspaper clippings showing the investigation into the bank. This includes the disappearance of Keinzeg, who was based on Roberto Calvi, the managing director of the Bank of Milan. He was found dead in London with $15,000 in his pocket. This was initially deemed as being self-inflicted, but I don't know if you walk around with that amount of money and then do that. Eventually, this led to a murder trial in 2005, with 2 Sicilian gangsters being convicted for the death. However, it has to be said that these convictions were overturned in 2007. This is why there's 2 attackers at 2 hours 17 though, with them both suffocating the character. In the movie, we hear he was last spotted leaving the Vatican with a large sum of cash. In real life, Calvi was said to have stolen $1.25 billion, which back in the 70s, insane amount of money. Insane amount of money now, but back then, sheesh. Vinny then tells Michael of what he learned with Altobello, and he inducts him into the family on the agreement that he leaves Mary alone. In the lead up to this, Michael tells Vinny to tell him quickly, and according to IMDb trivia, this is a nod to when Tom Hagen said to Jack Waltz that the Don insisted on hearing bad news straight away. In what's a replay of the end of part 1, we see his ring being kissed, not like that, and then the theme plays over the top. Now that takes us to the opera, with the assassins carrying out their hits. Mosca operates with an M38 Carcano carbine, which was the same gun used to assassinate JFK. Connie also uses poison cannoli to get to Altobello, which he has to chow down on first. He thinks her taking it shows it's not poison, but yeah mate, bit suspicious how little she bites off there mate. Vinny then rejects Mary, and she of course blames her father for this. So the last act to her was him basically ruining her life, but at least your kids won't have 6 fingers, I suppose. Well, you won't have kids, because... But you know what I mean. Now, if the setting of this opera, it might look familiar, and that's because this takes place in Sicily. The stage is a recreation of the square, so technically, this is a return to the trilogy's most iconic landmark. We then get what's your sort of classic Godfather death compilation. In real life, Pope John Paul was found dead sitting up in his bed, with it being speculated that he drank poison tea. This is why the Archbishop puts his down, but Michael didn't really have a hand in it and in fact wanted to save him. Michael being informed of this is what draws him away from the chair, and it means Mosca can't pull the trigger on him. Now as death rolls in on stage at the hour 20 mark, we also see as it comes for Altobello. In the theatrical cut, Lucchese's neck is attacked by Carlo, but originally it was supposed to be much more bloodier. However, this was cut due to the MPAA rating, though Coppola included it on CODA. Unfortunately, we can't show it yet. Very brutal and violent, with him being stabbed in the neck by the leg of his glasses. The Archbishop's then killed as the opera comes to an end. Mosca kills Mary and...
Dad?
Dear me. Anyway, we see Michael's screams, which are drowned out by the music. Now this was done for a stylistic reason, in which it was supposed to mirror the first film. In the restaurant when Michael carries out his first murder, the noise is drowned out by the sound of a subway train. It was thought that his original sin was silent, and thus the ultimate price of it should be silent too. This is one big butterfly effect that led out from that moment and ultimately cost him the life of his daughter. We join him sat on his own in what the commentary tells us is 1997. Having lived a long life full of misery, he thinks back on it before we then fade to black. Makes you look back on the film, and though I think it has good parts in it, it also has some really bad ones. Nominated for several awards, the only one the movie picked up was Sofia Coppola's Razzie. Now though it got nominated for Best Picture, I kind of think the Academy just did what they normally do, which is just decide the nominees based off reputation, and both it and Goodfellas lost out to Dances with Wolves. However, I do think there are good parts here to like, but in comparison to the other two, it just falls short. It also released, the same year as Goodfellas, which ushered in that new wave of gangster flicks. That was slicker, had wit to it, and ultimately prevailed in ways this movie didn't. It's sad as those first two films are incredible, but when put next to this, it just falls short. Hopefully though, this video has helped you appreciate it a bit more and learn some stuff about it that you might not have known. If it has, then please hit the thumbs up and drop your thoughts on it in the comments below. Now speaking of Goodfellas, I'm putting that on the list of movies we're going to get to. We just have a couple more before that. Firstly is Alien Resurrection, which will close off our Alien rewatch. We're then going to start The Matrix and do The Wicker Man as well, which I feel bad because we do keep delaying it. However, it's all purely down to copyright reasons and just getting in trouble off lawyers, but those are coming. And if you want to see them before anyone else, then please consider joining our membership program. For 99 cents and 99 pence a month, you'll get early access to a whole host of videos. It is something that really makes the channel and means we can focus on talking about the classics instead of having to chase trailer views and news updates on that day-to-day grind. Now, if you want something else to watch, then we have breakdowns of both part 1 and 2 on screen right now. We've gone in depth on both movies, so definitely head over there right after this. But out of the way, thank you for clicking this. I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.